Welcome to the Code with Jason meetup. Today we're going to do a consulting session with my friend Duncan. Duncan, welcome.
Thanks. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm excited.
Yeah, and thanks for airing your dirty laundry in front of the world and such. What I think I want to do is I'll turn it over to you and you can give us a little bit of background on what you're working on. And maybe if there are some certain areas you want to focus on today, you can highlight those and then we can go ahead. How does that sound?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm very happy with that.
All right. I'll turn it over to you then.
All right. So just for some general context on what we're going to be looking at today, I work with an organization called the World Cube Association. They administer Rubik's Cubes competitions. And I'm very, very privileged to be a paid contractor doing some work with them. All the code is open source, but things have kind of reached to the point where we need some really dedicated work on some of the fundamental systems that keep things going. So the World Cube Association kind of sanctions speed cubing competitions around the world, people who try to solve Rubik's Cubes very quickly. And there's a software platform that supports that in a number of ways. The way that will be relevant to us today is volunteer organizers can create competitions and then users can register for those competitions. And especially after COVID, we saw phenomenal growth in how many people wanted to attend a speed cubing competition, to the point that every time a relatively large competition's registration would open, our poor little Rails monolith would just crash we would have these huge demand spikes where, like, for 5 minutes, 500 people are trying to register for a competition with 100 slots, and then the website goes down, and then it comes back again, and we get a lot of complaints. So we are in the process of redesigning a registration system. There's kind of a number of things we could say on the infrastructure of that, but particularly what I'm probably interested in today is the testing side of the registration system. The last time Jason and I chatted, we had something very gross. There were several thousand lines worth of fixtures. All the testing was being done as essentially feature tests, end-to-end tests using RSwag. So there was a lot kind of not quite right. Since then, we've migrated pretty much all of our fixtures to factories, which has been amazing, blissful, really, really enjoyable. And then we're also in the process of refactoring where a lot of our validations happen in this. And there's kind of validations in the sense that Ruby uses the word. So we've actually started using the word checks instead. So there's like model validations we're probably familiar with in terms of like, is this a number, and is this number within certain bounds, and all of those automated checks that active record will run when you define them. And then for us, we're more concerned about, like, okay, you're a competitor who's trying to register for a competition, and there might be a number of restrictions on who can register. So are you fast enough? Are you a banned competitor? Are you registering for a valid set of events? Is your comment too long? All of these kind of checks for whether we can actually write something to the database according to the rules that an organizer has defined. So yeah, that we've been kind of busy moving where a lot of that logic sits. So I'd also be interested in just kind of presenting that and getting thoughts on if it's a reasonable refactor.
Okay, great. Okay. And Bishoy, I think I saw your hand raised for a second. Did you have a question?
By mistake, sorry.
Mistake. Okay, no problem. Okay. And I'll also say before we get started, for the benefit of you guys here and anybody watching this on YouTube, what I'm going to do with Duncan today, this is kind of an open offer to anybody. So if you have an application that you're comfortable sharing with everybody, we can take a look at it together and we can kind of work through whatever you want to work through. And it's kind of, it's less about roasting your code and more about helping you move forward and achieve whatever it is you want to achieve next. Anyway, having said that, Duncan, what do you say we dive in and look at whatever you want to look at first?
Sounds good. Sounds very good.
Okay.
Should I go ahead and share my screen?
Sure.
You might just need to enable sharing. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Okay, should be good now.
Right. Okay. You should now be seeing a project directory.
It's still on its way up for me.
Okay. Zoom
Yeah, I don't think you're
things.
doing anything wrong on your end. I think there's just a bit of a delay.
Okay,
here we go.
okay.
I can see it now.
Okay, perfect. Is this kind of legible? Let's open up a
yeah,
file.
I think if you can make the font slightly bigger, just bump it up a couple notches just for the sake of the YouTube video later.
That might take a quick Google from me. I'm a proud Leader Plus, okay? Leader Plus. Oh, I'm going to be honest, I may have no idea how to do this, but we can.
Yeah,
it's
that's
all
fine.
open
Let's
source,
not
so I
worry
can
about
happily
it.
post the repo link as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm a LunarVim user, so I can do a limited set of things, and then as soon as you ask me to do anything that would be reasonable in VS Code,
one quick thing to try. If you type Command plus, does that do anything?
No.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, no
so
big deal.
Leader Plus, yeah.
Yeah, we could.
Oh, hang on.
Oh, there we go. Great. Okay.
To be honest, I don't know what I did, but this should be more legible. Hey.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Okay. So let's start off on roots.rb just to give you a general sense for how this works. And this is kind of a service or a microservice as part of the service architecture, and there's kind of certainly a conversation to be had that I think is an interesting conversation about the validity of that decision. But if we kind of assume as a premise that this is a service that then connects to our main monorail, that kind of explains why we have very few paths. And this is totally registration focused as a service. So we have a get register, we have a post register, and a patch register. And the two routes we're really interested in are post and patch. Post is how one would initially create a registration, and patch is how one would update a registration. So probably generally intuitive if you're already familiar with Rails. And then if we want to look at our registration controller, we have those two functions. So we have a create request, and then we also had
and sorry, before we go into more detail, yes. Duncan, so there's the architecture. We could provide an explanation, and if we wanted to, we could scrutinize that. Maybe we don't have to do the scrutiny right now, but I think it might be helpful to at least provide a little bit of explanation. So as I understand it, Duncan, and tell me if I have this right or wrong, is there's this original application. It was maintained for some period of years. It maybe got kind of nasty and hard to maintain and such. And so the idea, as I understand it, is rather than try to work within this old, difficult application, you're starting something fresh that kind of treats this original application as an API so that you can work with more of a blank slate so you have an easier time. Do I kind of have that right?
Exactly. I think that's one of the big considerations. One of the other ones is being able to individually scale up certain services. So if we're only running registrations and we know we're going to have 3,000 people trying to register, then we can pump the resources allocated to this and be much more confident that it won't crash. We also have a different type of database running off this as well. We have key value here, which is also a bit nice to work with. So yeah, I'd say those are the main considerations.
Okay. Yeah, and I reserve judgment about that architectural decision. Maybe it's a great idea, maybe it's not. I don't know. I don't know enough about the entire situation and the history and all that stuff in order to make a judgment. So I make no judgment regarding that. Sanjeet, I see you have a raised hand.
Yeah, just trying to understand, Duncan, that's all. So is it a bit like you maintained some of the legacy stuff as a backend, and this was more front end. That is what you were trying to do. Was that how, or was it
Yeah,
a mix of front end and back end? Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, it's a great question. And the easiest thing might be to show you. So essentially, it's a mix of front end and back end on both sides. Here is my... so if I just go to the World Cube Association website, or let's go to our staging website, actually, sorry about that. The homepage we're going to be greeted by is, this is a monolith or a monorail, however you want to call it. And there are a number of kind of functions provided on the top, results we're interested in, competitions we're interested in. And we like, this is existing functionality that we need to maintain for our users. And if we went to competitions, this will give us a list of competitions. And when I click into a competition, once we're at the /competition, sorry, I've got this huge thing, I can't see my URL bar. Once we're at the /competition name, that's where our new service takes over. So this now has its own front end and back end.
Understood. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, cool. No problem. Thank you.
Okay. And I should make a general comment, Duncan. When I work with my paid consulting clients, it can take several sessions before we actually get somewhere really productive, because it can take a long time for me to understand the business and the context and all that stuff. So I'll just say that for expectation setting, it might be a number of times of us talking together before you really feel like we've done anything meaningful.
No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think we've had a couple of conversations before, and I think as we've probably all experienced, it's easy to start taking for granted all the little nuances of your specific problem and your business logic and everything, until you start speaking to somebody who's outside of the team and realize how much embedded logic there is. So that makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah. And on my end, I have to be very careful not to jump the gun and give advice without understanding the full context. Sanjit, I see the raised hand. I don't know if that's still from before, or if you had another comment or question, but you can feel free just to interrupt anytime if you have a comment or question.
Hand lowered. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay. So Duncan, please feel free to proceed.
Sweet. Okay. So what I'm going to start off with, I think, is speaking about the kind of checking registration logic that's the refactor that I spoke about. And what we in this branch, I have both. So I have both where the logic used to be, which is in the controller, and where the logic currently sits, which is in its own service, essentially. So let's say that we are hitting that, which route would it be? We're hitting this post API register route, and because we want to create a registration for a certain competition. So we'll hit that route with a certain payload. It will have the ID of the competition that we want to register for. It'll have, let me actually just show you what a registration looks like. I should be able to register here. Sorry, the UI is all very placeholder, so forgive us for that. And just give me 1 second while I just demonstrate a registration. Okay, here we go. So here's a Brazilian competition that's going to be happening, I think, on the 11th. If I want to register for it. So this is kind of the page that has all the different information for the competition. And if I want to register for it, I would come down here. There's a number of events. There's 11 different events happening at this competition. I want to do 3x3, the normal Rubik's Cube, and I want to do it blindfolded, let's say. So I select just those two. Here is a test comment. Or let's say I'll only be arriving at 11:30 to compete, for argument's sake. This is, we would just communicate something here to the organizers. I'll be bringing 2 guests with me. And then I will click send registration. And that hits that post/register route with a JSON payload. If I was really smart, I would have captured that earlier. Oh, well. Okay.
Okay,
I
and
think
sorry,
we kind of get the
Duncan,
principle there.
the UI
Yes.
that we just looked at just now, this
Yes.
is hooked up to the code we're looking at right now. Like, this is the service which makes the API request to the old app, or is this all the old app?
So this is all the new app, actually. So
Okay.
this is the new app has a front end, and then it has a back end API. So this is all new stuff connected up.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's not live from my editor. This is our staging website, but yeah, this is all new stuff.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Okay. So then we would have a JSON payload, which includes, we had a comment, we had some events, we have a competition ID, and we have my own user ID. All of that then hits the create function. But before create runs, we have this before validate create request. So there we go. So in this validate create request, a number of things happen. We define some instance variables. We need some information about the competition we're registering for. So this @competition variable or instance variable, it goes to our competition API and it calls a particular competition ID, and that will tell us stuff like what events are being held at the competition, what are the qualification requirements for those events, etc. And then we run a function called create registration allowed. Oh, this is the new logic. Okay. Sorry, I lied to you.
Mm-hmm.
What we will do is run a function called create registration allowed. What we have been doing is in the controller, we had all of these different functions defined. So for example, user can create registration with an exclamation mark at the end telling us that it'll return a Boolean or raise an error. And here we check stuff about whether the user is allowed to create this registration. Now, only admins or users can create registrations for themselves. So I can't impersonate another SpeedCuber and try to create a registration for them, but an admin submitting this via the API would be able to, for example. Similarly, if our registration is closed, then we wouldn't allow the user to register. So we check with the competition whether the registration is open, or whether they're an admin who has rights to overwrite that. So does that kind of general principle make sense, that there's a bunch of checks we need to run that are distinct from model validations before we can write this registration?
Yeah, I think I understand the big picture.
Yeah, and then we end up with a pretty long controller. We've got like 350 lines here, and the vast majority of this is just that checking logic. Are we allowed to create or update this registration? Okay. And we felt like the controller maybe wasn't a great place for it, particularly because it makes your tests quite awkward. So if I want to test, are we enforcing that is admin or current user function correctly? I need to make a controller call, which ends up being an end-to-end test, which is a bit awkward when I just need to like check the output of one particular function. So
yeah,
what we've shifted towards doing, originally we thought about whether we could put that logic in the model, but it just seemed very awkward because this isn't actually model logic. A lot of this requires fetching information from our different APIs and different services, which felt out of scope for the model. So in doing some research, we heard about the notion of kind of services in Rails, it was the first time I'd heard about it, but it sounds like a catch-all for, if you're not sure where something goes, make it a service. And and then stick all the logic there. So that's what we've gone with, and subjectively, at least, I quite like it, because what we end up with is we have this registration checker class. Sorry, I need to move my little zoom bar. So what this looks like in the controller is, instead of all of these different controller functions, these 5 or 6 lines of controller functions, we just do one call to the registration checker service. We call the create registration allowed function, and we pass it some parameters. Sorry, this is very long. We give it our registration payload. We give it the result of calling the competition API information, and we give it our the authentication token for our current user. And with that information, it then has, its own couple hundred lines of validations it runs. So if I called that create registration allowed, it sets up its own instance variables, and then in kind of a similar pattern, it has a bunch of exclamation functions. So create user can create registration, and then it comes here and does similar things. Unless the admin, unless they're the current user of the admin, then we raise an insufficient permissions error and all that stuff. So all of that control logic has basically moved in here. So far, I'm liking it. It feels a lot cleaner. And it means that our tests feel like much more what a test should be. So with all of our tests, basically we use some factories to set up our test data, and then we just call the create registration allowed method on the registration checker with whatever test conditions we've set up, and then we expect a certain value back from the registration checker service.
Okay.
How much sense is that making?
I believe I understand the high points of everything. I'd be lying if I said I understood all the details, but at least the high points I think I'm following so far. I think I would benefit from some additional big picture context. So this big picture endeavor that you're embarking on, and by you I mean the team, is what? So at one point in time, there was this original application, this original monolith, and then at some point in time, which may be the present for all I know, or it may be some point in the future, when you register for an event on the live production site, you'll not be using the monolith, but you'll be using this new application which talks to the original monolith. Can you just help me get oriented in like where we are? First of all, is that perception right? And if so, like where are we in that process presently?
Yeah, so that perception is spot on. And what we are going to currently, we are about to start a beta test with some of our users, and that'll just be on the staging website. We've already got it deployed, and we're hopefully days away from giving beta testers access. And that's going to be especially working with our competition organizers, the people who receive and administer these registrations. We want to make sure that we have feature parity with the existing system. Like all the features they currently use, we want to make sure they're still there and their work is expected. So obviously we have our own front-end and back-end testing we do, but this would really be user acceptance testing.
Yeah.
Once we work through that user acceptance testing, which will take weeks, hopefully, then what we would want to do is start a production rollout in the monolith. And basically what we would have, if we think about this competition list, we have a list of a number of different competitions that someone could sign up for. And this list of competitions is in the monolith's database. And we would have a little like Boolean flag, which says like, does this use the new registration system or not? And based on that, we would send them to the new registration system. So we'd start off, hopefully in a month, we'll have like 1 or 2 live production tests. And then as we gain confidence, we'll progressively move more and more competitions over to the new service.
I see. Okay. Okay, thinking. Okay. I was commenting to somebody the other day. It's like there's an interesting difference between online discussions and being physically in person, because when you're in person, it's like not weird to just like sit there silently and just be like, and just like think for a few minutes. But when you're on a call, it's like socially inappropriate to just be like, I'm just going to sit here. We're all going to sit here in silence for like 5 minutes and just think. And that's like
going to be okay.
What I want to do right now, but that's not what you do. Okay.
I'm happy to catch my breath if you want to just sit and think for a bit.
Well, I'm going to think for, let's call it 10 seconds, just because at this point I kind of lost my train of thought.
So can I ask something around the services? I'm relatively new to Rails, and I haven't heard about the services before, I have to say. So are you sort of using it as a holding pattern, perhaps to move it elsewhere later, or whatever recent services you plan to keep it there for the foreseeable future?
So I think at the moment we plan to keep it here for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
And again, I need to be careful about the terminology. So we at a high level, at an architectural level, we're trying to move to like a service-based architecture, which is a different use of the term services from here, which is really just what folder in my Rails project does a file exist in.
Yeah.
And unless we thought of, or somebody on this call knows of, a better place to keep this kind of registration checker class, we would probably keep it in services.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Trying to understand your thinking pattern. That's all. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that's something I would like to discuss at some point, because I'm quite familiar with the idea of services. And I have some very strong opinions about that way of doing things. But I fear that things might get out of proportion if we focus on that too early and whatnot. Okay, so, and I'll say this, I perhaps have a tendency to annoy and exasperate people with a lot of questions and scrutiny and such. So just I'll preface a lot of this with that. So I want to subject absolutely everything to intense scrutiny that we're looking at here. And if it can stand up to the scrutiny, then obviously great. And if it can't, then maybe some changes are called for.
That's why I'm here, yeah.
But the first thing that I want us to scrutinize together is this idea, which I find really interesting and maybe compelling, maybe not compelling, I'm not sure yet, of getting around this challenge of working with this old monolith by kind of creating this new service separate from it, where we don't have all the baggage of the old monolith. How would you respond to somebody saying that's a terrible idea? You should just work within the monolith because that will actually be easier. What would you say to somebody who said that?
I would say we've tried both, and our velocity drops dramatically when we're working in the monolith. I'll preface, I'm a junior developer, as opposed to kind of the senior I work with on the team. So he's done a lot of the more hardcore development work, and very much his experience was, building out this registration system was very fast. And then as soon as he needs to integrate it with the monolith, things slow down dramatically. Now, someone could make the argument, well, that's because you weren't designing with the monolith in mind initially. I don't think that's true. We have a very strong understanding of the monolith and how this would have needed to fit in. The problem is that we're trying to make some significant changes in how registrations are handled, and we have a fairly tightly coupled monolith at the moment, which means that it would be quite difficult for us to make these refactors in the monolith. On top of which, we need to be really careful about breaking anything that the rest of the website relies on. Because if we break anything that the rest of the website relies on, like we're displaying records, and we could incorrectly display a world record, or attribute it to the wrong user or whatever. And yes, in a well-designed system, the things would not be so tightly coupled, and they're not quite that bad, but we would be slowed down significantly by a production incident. We've already been slowed down once by a production incident, and even more so if there's any kind of data protection concerns, or any of that kind of stuff. Anything that requires more than just fixing a code problem.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to say, just for whatever it's worth, that I sympathize with the situation. And my take is that it's very much not an easy problem to deal with, and the right answer is very unclear. Yeah, and I'm coming at this not from the perspective of like, let me scrutinize the decisions you've made, but let's you and me scrutinize all these things together and try together to figure out a good way to move forward. Interesting. So a concern, if
Can
I
I?
were in your shoes, a
Yeah.
concern that I would have is like, okay, what if I build these things separate from the monolith and that all goes well enough? But I still have this monolith. And is it going to be the case that that monolith never needs to be changed or debugged? Like, I guess my broader question is, let's say this endeavor is successful. Where does that leave us? Like, what's the end state that we're shooting for?
So we have, I would say, 4 or 5, depending on how to split it up, pretty logically distinct components within our monolith. And I think where we would want to end up is it makes sense to probably spin out 4 of those into their own services. Well, to us, it makes sense. And so we'd end up with a few different kind of pillars. And then in the middle is the monolith, which still serves as our homepage, still serves as our repository and database for anything that doesn't obviously belong in one of the other services. But what we get to do is we get to cut out, once we finish a service port, we get to kind of cut out pretty large swaths of code and make the monolith a lot simpler and easier to work with.
Yeah, okay. So tell me if I understand this right. Let's say there's 5 services. Maybe we would extract behavior from the monolith and move it from the monolith into one of these services so that the services grow and the monolith shrinks over time. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that seems like it might be a good idea. How come multiple microservices and not just one single service that does, why not have the monolith, the original monolith, and like a new monolith, and you extract behavior from the old monolith to the new monolith and do it that way?
It's an interesting question. It's something we haven't thought about explicitly before. So it might warrant further consideration. I guess the main reason, or there's 2 reasons I could mention. By far, the main one would be scalability and resilience. So an issue we have is, different parts of our website are popular at different times for different reasons. And it's very expensive to try to have an appropriately, in terms of money, to try to have an appropriately sized monolith for everything, when everything could include this, 8x, 10x, 20x jump in registrations for a very short period of time. As opposed to having a specific service that only focuses on registrations, where we know we have some advanced warning, and then we can say, okay, let's upgrade kind of the fleet size for registrations. Let's pre-scale that. That's going to be big for 15 minutes. That can come down. The rest of the monolith can stay up, or vice versa. The monolith can get DDoSed, and the registration service can stay up. And then we can then bring the size of the registration service down as we need to. So yeah, that's definitely an issue we had in the past, was, the website would get a lot of traffic, and now suddenly people can't register for competitions, or people can't register for competitions, and now the rest of the website is unusable as well.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And as you're reminding me of these things, I'm remembering our past conversations in these areas. And I'm realizing that there are multiple distinct concerns involved. One of the concerns is kind of what you might call the workability of the code, the maintainability of the code. And it sounds like the maintainability of the code in the original monolith is in such a state where it's just not really workable anymore. Is that the kind of the conclusion you've come to?
Give me a second to think about that. Yeah, probably. I was in a meeting with our team lead the other day, and he was asked by a different team, hey, on this form, could we make a small change here where we add this button or where we add this text? And he was like, absolutely not. We we cannot devote resources to working in that part of the code. So I think we're very close to that point if we're not at that point yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so one of the desired outcomes of this project is to end up with a system that can be worked on economically. Because it's not that the monolith can't be maintained. It's just maybe that it's prohibitively risky and expensive to do work on the monolith.
And I would say it requires, at the moment at least, a lot of embedded knowledge. And one of our kind of design philosophies, or one of the aspects of our organization, is we have a couple of paid contributors, and then a larger team of volunteer contributors, and then an even larger, pool of people who might just contribute once on GitHub. And currently, it is so difficult for a new contributor, ignoring the fact that we're on Rails, which already cuts down pretty significantly our pool of potential contributors.
Mm-hmm.
It's so difficult for someone to come in and just be like, I want to change this button on the create competition form. Because, the create competition form uses some like very arcane embedded JavaScript that, unless you sit down and have an hour conversation with the team lead who knows all of this, you'll never figure it out. So the idea of having these smaller, distinct little code bases where anyone familiar with our business logic will pretty intuitively understand why we've siloed them out. That's quite attractive to us, where there should be a lower ceiling on complexity.
Okay.
I don't know how much work should is doing in that sentence, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, a comment is coming to mind, which is, if you have a mess, then if you split it into, well, no, that's not exactly it. It's like, I'm not saying this about you specifically, but like, let's take a hypothetical team of junior developers, and their skills are only so much, and so they only know how to build kind of a mess. And so if they build a mess and then they split it into services, several services, now what they're going to have is several messes. So I think that's like a reality to keep in mind. That's not the same thing as me saying the service idea is wrong. I think that's just one fact to be kept in mind in considering the service idea.
Yeah. I definitely agree. Like, it still requires good design work to make sure that you're not making spaghetti code. And that's, I think, just to almost affirm that idea, one of the questions we've dealt with a lot as a team is, should we even be using Rails when most of our potential contributors know Python and JavaScript? And that's been kind of the response of our team leaders. Spaghetti code is spaghetti code no matter what language it's written in. So step one is to have decent code. And I think we could make a similar statement with monoliths. Like, a monolith that's spaghetti code or services that are spaghetti code is still spaghetti. And so our question has been, how can we kind of straighten out the spaghetti? And in the short term, at least, services seemed like a way to do that.
Okay. All right. So going back to like enumerating the desired outcomes of the project, One is to have a system that can be maintained more economically. And then there's also the performance considerations. So right now, there are, I guess I'll state all that I know for sure. Right now, there are performance problems. I think that's all that I know for sure. The exact nature of the performance problems, I don't think I really have a firm handle on yet. Can you help me understand those a little better?
I can help you understand them a little better.
Okay.
I don't think we have a strong root cause analysis beyond Ruby's kind of Rails is kind of slow.
Oh, yeah, and I'm only asking about the symptoms at this point.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Okay, yeah. So I mean, we'll have a competition for 200 people opening, and it's in a very popular area. So there are 1,000 people trying to register, and the behavior is if it opens at 4 p.m., everyone is there at 3:59, and everyone hits F5, for 30 seconds before it launches. And then either the site's already dead or people start registering, and especially once load starts hitting our database, we see dramatic slowdown. And this is where the site stops working for some people. They get 502s from our load balancer, or they're sitting waiting a minute for a registration payload to complete, and then they refresh halfway through and they lose their kind of spot in the queue. Yeah, so that's kind of the behavior we've been dealing with. And it's really bad UX because, not only is the site slow, but there's this fairness of who gets a registration. And if, if it's first come, first serve, I shouldn't lose my place. I shouldn't lose my place because the website crashed on me while I was trying to register.
Right.
Does that kind of answer the symptoms question?
I think so. So I'm taking some notes here. So the first thing we talked about, obviously, monolith is not economically maintainable. And it sounds like we have, I'm trying to figure out like a concise way to express it. Like we have registration spikes. Well, we have registration spikes and the problems that come along with that.
Yeah. We could even state it more generally, that there are registration spikes are the most common type of crash we deal with, but we also have, if I go to results, we also have this, we have this enormous database of results, I don't know, millions and millions and millions of rows. Okay, enormous to me. And people want to see where they're ranked. So we used to have an option to show 1,000 people on the ranking database for whatever slice you want to take. You can take a different event, you can take a year, you can take the gender, you can take the region. So there's thousands of permutations of how you want to view the results. And currently, someone selecting 1,000 people will just crash our database. I mean, that's a bit extreme, but we've had to disable it because we saw massive performance issues. And if somebody that leads to security concerns in the sense that if somebody understood which buttons to click, in what order, they can very easily just crash the website by overloading our database.
I see.
Yeah. I hope I've been vague enough about that, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, that actually seems like a distinct performance issue. So the one is like, I'm going to say, tell me if this sounds truthful. Registration spikes cause the site to crash.
Yes.
Okay.
Registration trap. Yeah. However you want to say it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry. And just I'm very aware that these are like distinct performance problems. The more general point is like we have a number of different classes of performance problems. And what we'd love to do is isolate them from each other. Instead of having all of these risks on one, on the same server, essentially.
I see. Yeah. and it seems like some of these performance problems are like on the way in and some are on the way out. At least that's how I'm thinking about it right now. Like the registration thing is where there's problems on the way in, and then this, for example, showing 1,000 competitors in the ranking.
Yeah, 1,000, the top 1,000 ranked competitors.
Yeah, that causes a problem on the way out.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just obviously like a fairly specific example, but like showing 1,000. Can you express for me what you call this? Showing 1,000 blah 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 causes it takes too long or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, showing the top 1,000 results causes like significant database performance issues.
Yeah, and does it like time out, or just does it take a really long time before you're able to see?
If it's like one person doing it once, it'll take a few seconds. The more people are accessing this, and the more someone subsequently access, okay, I wanted a top 1,000 for 3x3. Now I want it for 2x2. Now I want it for 4x4. Now I want male and female. Like the more ways somebody slices it, the more that performance issue builds up until it'll crash the website.
I see. Okay. Okay. So if I write down just showing top 1,000 results is too slow or whatever, I might not remember later what I meant by top 1,000 results. So can we be more specific about that? It's the top 1,000 what exactly?
Top 1,000 top 1,000 Rubik's Cube solve times. Would that make more sense? Or the 3x3 solve times? Yeah. Yeah, sorry, results is a very general term.
Takes too long. Okay, what I wrote down is showing top 1,000 solve times takes too long.
Yeah.
And obviously that's pretty vague, but I think that's sufficiently precise for our purposes right now. Okay, so what I have written down so far is the monolith is not economically maintainable, registration spikes cause the site to crash, and showing the top 1,000 solve times takes too long.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we could group that under a general point of like, I mean, this is a specific performance issue. Registration is a specific performance issue. There are a number of similar performance issues that, all have distinct solutions, but are ultimately like, we identify the cause as they're part of a monolith that has a lot of legacy code. And so the solutions are not trivial. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, and this idea that splitting the application into services, allowing these performance problems to be, okay, let me try to say what you said, and tell me if I'm giving it a fair characterization or not.
Go for it.
So the idea is that right now we have a monolith and everything's going through this one monolith. But if things are split into services, then it's no longer the case that all the traffic is going through the same place. And so, for example, the registration spikes don't have to have an effect on loading the homepage or something like that. So these separate issues are isolated from one another so that they don't affect each other. Is that the idea?
Yeah. And if I can add some context onto that, it would be that also feels like it future-proofs us a little bit, because the growth we're seeing as an organization is quite rapid. Like, we might double in terms of number of competitions held, and that's number of competitions written to the database this year compared to last year. So like, when we're dealing with that kind of scale of growth, the notion we aren't exactly sure what performance problems we're going to hit in the future. So being able to have distinct services where we can then isolate performance problems and solve them in a vacuum is quite attractive to us, if that makes sense.
Okay. I follow the reasoning. Frankly, I'm deeply skeptical that that's the answer. It's very unclear to me that there's not another way to achieve the same result that's easier and more effective. I don't know what that is. But I think it's a question worth exploring of, is there a different way to do this that's easier and more effective?
Interesting.
And I think, okay, so let's say this, all this work to migrate this behavior from the monolith to these other services, that I think will be quite a lot of work and take a very long time, and certainly is not without risk. I personally would be, well, all those things would concern me, the time it takes and the risk. It's like, if you put me in charge of this and I did all the coding and I had to migrate everything from the monolith to the services, I would set the probability that I do all that without making any big mistakes at roughly 0. Like, I'm sure that I would screw something up in that process. So that concerns me a bit. And so, given that this whole endeavor will probably be so time consuming and kind of risky, I think it's worth really deeply examining the options before embarking on all that risky, time consuming work. And I think one of the early things that's probably worth doing is doing some more, and maybe somebody's doing this already, finding out the answers to, like, what exactly is the root cause of, for example, registrations causing the site to crash. And it sounds like, from what you said earlier, like that answer is not fully known yet.
Yeah. I say this all with the caveat that I'm probably the most junior person on the team, so I might be subject to correction. But yeah, we tried to do some root cause analysis, and getting to anything really more specific than Rails seems kind of slow at this scale. We also kind of Googled around and tried to see what kind of requests per second are people getting at certain server sizes, and it didn't seem like the RPS we were seeing was radically different from what people were getting in the wild. So that's another thing that made us not go super hard on the RCA.
Okay. Well, there's not a lot that I'm willing to say with confidence right now, but one thing that I am willing to say is it's absolutely not the case that the root cause of the problem is that Rails is slow. Because Shopify and GitHub run on Rails, all these other sites that handle an enormous amount of traffic, way more traffic than this site, run on Rails. That's certainly not it. Usually it's something to do with the way the database queries are being done. That's
right.
That's always the first place I look. Yeah, and so if you're up for it, maybe a way that we could spend one of our future sessions is trying to dig into one of these, maybe the registration spikes, maybe this, actually looking at this this results page might be easier, because like something like a traffic spike is obviously really hard to reproduce. Can't just conjure up a traffic spike on demand. But anyway, if you're up for it, maybe we could look into some of these performance issues and see if we can get something more specific on what the root cause is.
Yeah, I think I'd be particularly interested in trying to look at this ranking spike. I definitely think there's a lot of room for growth in our team in terms of what the drivers of performance are, and especially because we're not moving away from Rails anytime soon. I think there'd be a lot of value in that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are at about an hour, so we'll wrap it up soon. Yeah, I'll open it up. I usually open things up for a little bit of group discussion at the end if people want to. Sanjit, Ronan, Bishoy, any questions or comments or anything you want to discuss before we go?
I'd say that I appreciate your advice and opinions, Jason, because I share the same feeling towards Rails performance and the relevance of going for services, whether it's a layer within the app or just an architecture. That's quite interesting. The thing that I would say is that if it is a performance issue, the first thing to get are benchmarks and actual measurements and stuff like that, instead of just shooting blindly, trying to fix stuff in the hope that it will improve anything, which may be something that you already have. But that would be the first thing I would do in your situation. Collect data, but where exactly are the performance issues, and reproduce them so that we can prove that whatever change has been made has actually had a positive impact on the issues.
Will it be now? I'm picking your brains as well, Jason, when I ask this. Is there a way to reproduce that type of load, maybe on a staging environment or something?
A good question. It's something I have little to no experience with. Oh, Duncan.
Yeah, we used a service called Locust, which is a Python-based load testing service. There may be more sophisticated ways to do it, but yeah, we could very easily simulate that. You basically define a set of HTTP requests that'll be sent to your server. How much Python you want to write will kind of determine how sophisticated those requests will be. But yeah, we could pretty reliably crash our system with that, and then at the very least get a sense of what requests per second could we support.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because that is where I would go, in terms of somehow reproducing it in a non-production environment and take it from there.
Yeah. Crap, I had something I was gonna say. It was profoundly important. Oh yeah, I think it was this. Last thing before we wrap up, I just want to say again, Duncan, I appreciate your gameness in showing us all this stuff and accepting this criticism publicly and stuff like that. You are an intrepid soul, and I appreciate it very much.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity to share the knowledge and try to wrap your head around my bad explanations of our business logic. I'm very appreciative and more than happy to air the dirty laundry in public.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and I will see you next time.
Thank you.